Hello, everyone. My name is Paul. Welcome back to the new news. I hope that y'all are having a great day. I hope that you've had a wonderful weekend. I hope that you're safe, that your friends and your family are safe, of course. And if not, I really do hope that you find that safety and security in the very near future, because there's obviously a lot of stuff going on throughout the world right now. So we have a couple of different developments, and I've been kind of making the map a little bit more colorful. You might see this as a further development as I kind of sit here and try to sort what's going out through the news. So we have a couple of different stuff going on in the world that kind of needs our attention. And there's a couple of things that are developing that I think are going to develop into rather big, prolonged things that are going to be rather difficult for your average person to understand. Kind of like the war in Ukraine, it's very long. While up front, most people can understand it. I mean, at least they're wearing uniforms. The things like the Turkish invasion, right, of Syria, which we're going to be getting into today a little bit. The conflict kind of needs to get addressed a little bit. So as that develops, we're actually going to be doing a similar thing to how we run Ukraine, which is where we have, the red dots are Russian-focused things regarding the war, and then yellow dots are Ukrainian-focused things regarding the war, and then blue dots, of course, are NATO and allied countries assisting Ukraine and making their news announcements regarding the war. But in Syria, we're going to be doing this light gray for Turkey, specifically. And then we're going to be doing a brown for the opposition, so the other forces that are engaging Turkish forces. I might do black for the Islamic State because they have a lot of news that's been going on. And while I like the fact that we have everything that's kind of international news separate from, the main topics of the day, as we've come along thus far, we've gone from just having, the war of Ukraine be the focus, and it's turned into a lot more of other stuff that's going on in the world, and we won't be able to report to you on all of it, because time, the world keeps turning, time keeps going by, and the war in Ukraine isn't the only thing going on, and we want to be a news channel and not just a Ukraine-focused channel. We're not trying to ride the wave of Ukraine. So that's kind of where we're at in the process now, and you're probably going to see some further development and some further explanation as we kind of develop a little bit of a better system here for reporting. But with that, there's a lot of stuff going on, like I said, and unfortunately, this is affecting millions of people throughout the world. As you saw regarding our actual title for the day, global famine turned weapon of war, and that has a lot to do with regarding Ukraine, but it impacts us globally. It impacts you, it impacts me, it impacts all of us. We see rising prices because of this, and more than that, because at least we are relatively well off, for at least the vast majority of us. Places like Ethiopia, Somalia, the Middle East, places that are affected that already may have these food and water and security, lack of security, and just general insecurities regarding their well-being, require humanitarian assistance. Places that have been impacted by major economic downturns and major natural disasters that require relief. And of course, the war in Ukraine in and of itself. And so we are the news that want to give back, and we want to be able to do that on every single stream. So please check out the donation links below in our description. We've vetted all of those for you. We go through, we make sure that they're actual organizations. 80% or more of the donations actually go to their programs, meaning that they actually help people. They're not just going to salaries and administration costs. So please check it out. If you can't give a lot, give a little. If you can't give anything at all, give us a like and subscribe. The more people that come here and watch the news, of course, and the more people that get involved with this project of ours, the more help we can do globally. I really appreciate the support you've already given us, and we'll continue, and hopefully we'll continue to give us and these organizations in the future as we continue. And without further ado, we're going to go ahead and dive right into the news here. So we have a couple of different developments going across Ukraine, and it's a little bit more widespread than what it normally is. Normally, we may have something up here in Lviv or Kyiv, and then we immediately jump down into what's going on here in the Donbass. There's a couple of different developments over the last 24 hours that have really critical impacts for the globe when it comes to Ukraine. So the first thing that happened, not so much a globally impacting, but more of an annoyance than anything else, is the fact that Ukraine's football broadcast, or at least here in the United States we would call it soccer, was actually hacked. So this is during the match between Ukraine versus Wales, and during that football match today, the Russian Federation actually hacked the broadcasting, and they actually started streaming Putin. So we'll actually take a look at some of this here.
Порки, петухи ломанули украинские каналы. По всем украинским каналам Пол ТВ какой-то изи показывает.
Really annoying, I would have to say. If I went to go watch a football match and then all of a sudden I had to sit there and listen to the guy who's invaded my country talk to, I don't know, a news broadcaster from his bunker, probably be relatively annoyed. But that just shows that really Russia is going to do anything and everything. What is the major strategic gain for, hacking a broadcast? Well, there isn't really, or in to say that you can do it. But they haven't really conducted cyber warfare on a massive level, and they haven't really militarized that aspect of it, which is something that was heavily expected. And that may be either a lack of willingness to do so, because they could indeed take down infrastructure in Ukraine if done right, or it could just be the lack of capabilities than what we thought, because much like the rest of the Russian military, at the beginning of the war, we thought the Russian military was going to, everyone thought that Ukraine wasn't going to last this long. Statistically, they shouldn't have, but they certainly have. It's been a very, very, very well fought war on the part of Ukraine, but on paper, on the outside of war, it didn't make sense. And the Russian Federation, for all intents and purposes, really projected their power and their military prowess in a much better light than what in reality it turned out to be. But the major impacts that are going to be globally are these, and that's because 5 Russian missiles hit grain targets near Kyiv. And so one of these even flew over a nuclear power plant near Enerhodar. Now, that's a terror in and of itself, because we know that these missiles have failures before. One actually landed outside of Kyiv during one of the last strikes and actually landed in a village. And so we know that they can have failures. They may not reach targets, and should one of those failures occur when the flight path is directly over a nuclear facility, that's a little bit terrifying. But this comes merely days after the Russian Federation, specifically Putin himself, said he was not going to be using global famine as a weapon of war. And this is because he was saying that they were going to be finding ways to make an agreement to allow for the export of these grains in order to relieve global market supplies, which is something that everyone was kind of looking forward to. Everyone's kind of working towards that goal. The European Union, NATO have both been trying to figure out alternative routes since the ports are blockaded, but those are coming up with only limited quantities and limited relief via how they're planning on doing it. So there really isn't any set system without the deblockading of ports. And this these grain supplies are just sitting in Ukraine unless they're getting forcefully taken, and they're getting taken by the Russian Federation and shipped back to the Russian Federation, like in the Kherson Oblast, which we've aired here. Once again, pillaging is also a war crime. But just take a look at this. I mean, we're not going to turn global famine into a weapon of war. Immediately begins targeting grain stocks. So let's take a look at this.
Прилет по Деверзе. 4, блядь, уже, ебать, колотить.
So we can take a look at these. These are major grain export facilities throughout here. You can see these are hopper cars for train cars. So these are where you would actually bring grain in, and then you can dump it into these pits, and this actually filters through into another system. My uncle actually works for a grain company where they do this, so it's actually kind of a cool process. But this is what's happening. I mean, they are... This is what they're targeting now. And this happened at 5:30 this morning. So this is first thing in the morning. You can see here the smoke pouring over Kyiv. And here's one of the missiles flying over a facility. So I'm going to full screen this. See here, the camera tracks it. You can see it goes right over the nuclear facility, the nuclear power plant, on its way to Kyiv. Now, this isn't something you should probably do, because could you imagine if the motor failed over this? And like I said, this is about 5:30 this morning. And this is over Enahadar, which is actually down here. Go all the way down here. This is the Enahadar nuclear facility. So, rather terrifying. And once again, the Russian Federation said they weren't going to turn the global famine, because that is what this is turning into. Ukraine is the breadbasket of Europe, and the amount of grain and food that is produced inside of Ukraine, I mean, that goes to the global market. That goes in your bread. That goes in your that goes in most of your grain products. That goes for feed for cattle. And other animals, right? So your meat, so your hamburgers, your pork, your pork chops, everything, that goes to and that also goes to humanitarian aid. A lot of grain from Ukraine is used for humanitarian aid, which has had to be emergency diverted because of the humanitarian crisis the war has caused, and so that is causing issues where they can't physically feed. They don't physically have enough rations for humanitarian aid for places like Somalia or South Africa or any of the other places that are in the world right now that need humanitarian aid. 90% of people up here, this is called the Tigray region of Ethiopia, 90% of people require humanitarian aid for survival. A lot of them are already in malnourished situations. 90% of people, or the vast majority, I should say, of people in this region, specifically in Ethiopia and Somalia, who are going to be affected by the current situation, are children under the age of 5, because they can't fend for themselves. They literally cannot go out and beg, borrow, steal at the age of 5. And I quite literally mean those things. So adults are going to be less affected because they can come up with some kind of creative ingenuity to at least some minimal extent. But, I mean, children at the age of 5, you're screwed. And 90% of Somalia is dry. Iraq is going through a terrible drought. The Tigris River is at an all-time low, and this is one of the largest rivers in the Middle East. And they're going through a drought that's causing a famine. Parts of Iraq, which we covered yesterday, a third of their harvest is already destroyed because of these droughts, and they can't import anything because there's nothing to import. The grain is stuck in Ukraine. They can't subsidize. They can't. Or Sri Lanka, where food supplies is running out, or Peru, where we've seen protests, or Colombia. Brazil, which just had massive landslides and flooding. Durban, South Africa, which just had like 400 people get killed because of flooding and landslides. This is why a global famine is now being used as a weapon of war. It is going to be a global famine. it is going to be a global shortage in food. Because grain, as long lasting as it may be, does not last forever. And not only that, but what grain is there, it's now extremely dangerous for a farmer to do their job. You have parts of Ukraine which can't farm anymore because of the war. There are many fields that are just littered with unexploded ordnance, so it makes it extremely dangerous for you to even plow or till your field, disc it, plant. And most of these guys are on the front lines fighting anyway. So the farmers aren't farming, they're fighting a war. So the next harvest is going to yield even less. As we jump over here into Kharkiv, we can see that Kharkiv is still receiving shelling. We actually talked about this a little bit yesterday when we saw Belgorod firing theater ballistic missiles. Belgorod, Russia, which is just over here across the border, is a major hub for Russian activity, for Russian military activity. We know that they have anti-air batteries. There's a large amount of logistics that go here. They have oil plants there, or oil and fuel storage facilities there at the very least. We know that they have theater ballistic missile batteries there. So these cruise missiles that they're talking about are really considered TBMs, or theater ballistic missiles, such as like the Tochka U. They're not intercontinental. They're just theater, so you can hit, you can hit Kyiv, you can hit anywhere in Ukraine, you could hit Belarus if you wanted. And that's what's getting used here, because normal Russian artillery just isn't in range of Kharkiv anymore. So instead, they're turning to this longer range stuff, and they're throwing less ordnance, but it's bigger ordnance at the city of Kharkiv, and still putting it under shelling, even as of today. So even though life in the city was supposed to return to normal, the metro finally opened. It's been a week since they got the last people that were living in the metro as a bomb shelter out, and now all of a sudden they're getting hit with more artillery all over again. This is now a weapon. This is a terror tactic. This is literally a terror tactic. You can't, first of all, it's a highly concentration of civilian populace, so it breaks the Geneva Convention to do this, and customary international humanitarian law, as I have talked about on this channel before. But on top of this, we've seen them use the tactic of shelling, pausing, allowing rescue workers to get out there, and then shelling the rescue workers. We had footage of that here on the channel. Now, because their normal artillery isn't in range, they're going to fire ballistic missiles at it, because they still just want to bomb Kharkiv. There's no strategic objective in doing it anymore. There's no tactical importance anymore, because any chance you had of taking the city has been long gone by now. So at this point, they're doing nothing more than really causing terror. There aren't really much military targets left in Kharkiv, or really infrastructure targets to hit, because you already bombed them all when you had a crap ton of artillery in the area. So this is literally just to frighten the people. There is no military gain that Russia can get from this other than terror. Take a look.
Опа. Ёпта. Я заснял.
And that actually finally brings us down into the Donbass, the meat and potatoes of the war right now. And as you may notice, the line has shifted a little bit here. Not by much, but it has shifted. We're giving it about a 30 to 40% recapture on the city thus far. Right now, they're reporting 50-50, as we can take a look here. So it's possible that 50% of Severodonetsk is now in Ukrainian hands after a massive counterattack over the last 72 hours. Major amounts of POWs. We've seen a lot of videos of POWs reportedly from Severodonetsk, though we could not confirm them. But that is basically where we're at. The city is essentially split in two. We haven't quite represented that on the map just because there isn't enough evidence to prove so. But that is kind of where we're sitting. We know that there's been gains. We know that there have been major gains. So we're giving it between about a 35% retaking of the city in Ukrainian hands just for error. But that is kind of where we're at. So let's take a look. So that's the overview of Severodonetsk. This is actually coming from DW. But they're saying that 70% of territory of Severodonetsk was retaken, and now they are driven back to 50%. And this is according to Sergei Haida, who is he's the governor of the Luhansk region for Ukraine. But you can see the fires are just going all over the city. This city it's a war zone. So you're going to see major fires burning. I mean, hands are kind of off the table. The gloves have come off already when it comes to the Russian Federation. And Ukrainian forces are now going to have to battle that just as aggressively. So that's kind of where we're sitting here. You see some of this combat footage we're getting over here.
Тихо, блядь!
It's urban warfare, and this is the deadliest type of warfare, in my personal opinion. Urban warfare, very close quarters, very difficult to clear, very difficult to really gain any type of advantage over your opponent when both of you are really engaged in heavy close quarters combat. Really, if you're an attacking force, you're anticipating 80% casualty rates. So you're expected to have very severe high casualties, which is what you see reflected in the intelligence reports. They're saying, at the beginning of the Battle of Severodonetsk, everyone was saying Russia's going to take a lot of losses going into the battle. Well, yeah, it's urban fighting. You should be planning for that. You see this reflected in things like the Battle of Fallujah, the battle for Marja, the battle for you're talking about the battle for Mariupol, or you're talking about all of these. I mean, this urban fighting is absolutely terrible for the attacker and for the defender. It's just as bloody. But this is kind of what they're talking about when it comes to the Battle of Severodonetsk. So this is kind of someone who's put this together to kind of show this is based off of their assessments of where Russian forces are really pushing and up until today. So that's where they're looking at. However, that's not what we are reporting just because we're going off of independent information. We just like to be a little bit well-rounded there. And what they're finding on some of the Russians that they are capturing is ridiculously inadequate equipment. So this is a tourniquet from the 1950s. You're seeing Ukrainian forces, they're putting on their cat tourniquets like I was talking about, previously when the one guy got hit off a ricochet off his rifle. He got shot in the arm. This stuff's from 1957. 1959. I mean, this stuff it's not adequate. I mean, first of all, stuff like this, bandages and stuff like this, they go outdated. They do expire. You can extend their life, but this is so old that there's no way this is good anymore. And there's so much better to do. And this isn't the only thing that we see when it comes to this. We are also seeing that from the type of weaponry being used. The Mosin Nagant for rear echelon forces. I mean, the Mosin Nagant, sure, it's a rifle, but is it really as good as an AK or an M4 or literally any other weapon that's been developed since 1898? Probably not. The Maxim machine gun, we've seen employed on both sides. For Ukraine, more for training purposes. Russia, we've seen it employed actually on the front. But the Maxim machine gun was used during World War I. There are much better machine guns. We've seen TPKs being used. We've seen all sorts of weaponry being used from World War One, World War Two. And really inadequate. Some of them with upgrades, which improves them in their capabilities. They're still weapons. They're still dangerous, but and when you think of modern warfare, this is not what you think. But when it comes to medical supplies, like this, weapons don't expire. They're still dangerous unless you make them no longer dangerous. Medical supplies no longer saves lives after a certain amount of time. The fact that this is from the 50s, I don't even know if it would hold properly. Also, that when it comes to tourniquets, that just does not look like it's going to cut the blood flow well enough. As we move down here over to Makilevka, this is actually up near Popasna. There's a couple different Makilevkas with over this area, but we're seeing where the Russian gains are as we're getting more and more information. We're really seeing, because originally we had a rather well-rounded kind of just bulge for Popasna. We're starting to really get an idea of to where the Russian forces are now as we're getting more and more information in this area. But Major General Roman Kutuzov was reportedly killed over near Makilevka when Ukrainian forces fired on his Gaz Tiger. This is something that reportedly even the Russians are saying, at least according to Ilya Ponomarenko, who is a reporter with the Kyiv Independent. He's an independent reporter. He's talked a lot about that stuff for us, and this is him. He was in charge of the DNR, or the Donetsk People's Republic, which is an unrecognized state, except for by Russia and Belarus. And he basically oversaw for the Russian Federation the coordination and the mobilization of the DPR. So this really means that the command structure for separatist forces, at least the DPR half of it, is really been taking a big hit. This would make General, I think, number 11, which is insane that Russia has lost this many generals. You want to talk about cutting the head off the snake? That's it. Well, especially when you're doing it 11 times, that severely demoralizes your troops even further, which we already know they are demoralized. But that also means that the next guy in charge is not going to be. He's not going to have this as much experience running that much. I mean, that large of a military force, and the amount of coordination and logistics it requires. He's not going to have the same amount of experience as the first guy had, and the first guy's already dead. So he's going to have to learn on the job, and that causes more mistakes. This is that Gaz Tiger. You can see where some rounds have gone through the windshield. Looks like they've also kind of up-armored this with some homemade, more Mad Max metal added to it. His radio, reportedly. So that's just kind of what we're hearing out of here. Once again, apparently that the Russians are, it's according to at least Ilya Ponomarenko, the Russians are saying, yes, this did indeed happen. But we're still saying reportedly this has occurred. We don't have actual confirmation at this point other than on the Ukrainian side. As we jump down here a little bit, the technicals have finally arrived. Now, we've seen technicals being used by the Chechens, but not so much by the Ukrainian forces. But as a stopgap measure, it seems that Ukrainian forces have been engineering their own MLRS technicals. They're unguided rockets that are mounted on the bed of a pickup truck. You see this in Africa. You see this heavily in Africa and the Middle East on basically every faction side. The SDF, the Syrian armed forces, most of the armed forces in Africa, most of the Islamic State, the Taliban. You saw this with the Afghan army. You see this with the Iraqi army. Like, this is technicals. They're cheap. That's the big thing. They're cost effective. They're cheap. They're portable. They're easy to produce. They're simple. You don't really need a lot of know-how to put these things together. You just need some metal tubes. So you need metal pipes and a way to light the rockets. As long as you have that and you have a way to kind of aim them, even if that's just with your truck, and to generally put rockets here, then that's all you really need. It doesn't take a lot of technical know-how. As long as you have someone that knows how to basic weld things, you can do it. So while it may not be great when you need like accuracy, it really is a cost-effective artillery piece. I mean, when you just need to harass the enemy, or when you just need to have more rockets for the bombardment, yeah, it works. So take a look at this thing. It's a pretty cool little thing. So it's literally a pickup truck. It's like I think it's a Mitsubishi actually. But it's just this little pickup truck, and they mounted some rockets on the back of it. And they got like their own, they mounted some flip switches over here so that you can actually fire it when it's on the vehicle. They just put it in the center console. Really ingenuitive, much more advanced than a lot of technicals I've seen. They actually have a frame here for mounting it. These are, once again, unguided rockets. So, but really simple. I mean, if this is literally, technicals are if it works, it works at the basic level. And you can throw, we've seen the Islamic State do this with like their suicide bombers. You can throw armor onto it. You can just do metal plating. I mean, the Russians are doing it with their actual military armored vehicles, let alone your everyday pickup truck. Get some sheet metal, get some random steel you got lying around, and just throw it onto your truck and just weld it on or bolt it on. And now it's even better armored against like small arms fire and from getting your back blast that's kicking up those rocks and dust. We're actually going to jump down here a little bit. So as we jump over here, this is Bezimene. Bezimene is the area. So I've talked pretty extensively regarding the fact that there is a filtration camp near this city. I do not know exactly where the filtration camp is near Bezimene. But when we talk about filtration camps, this is where it's at. So I just got a comment regarding the rockets from William Young. He says, I need to get that attachment for my Maverick. I imagine it's legal in the USA. 2A, Second Amendment, right? No. No, also, it's actually not very good for the vehicle. So one of the more famous technicals is mounting a Dishka, which is it's a 50 caliber machine gun for Russia. It's called the Dishka or in American, but it's really the Dishke. And it's a 50 caliber machine gun. It's actually a 12.7 by 108 millimeter. The American 50 cal is actually 12.7 by 99. And the thing is, they mount these to the trucks, but because your truck's not made to do that, it actually warps the frame and the chassis of your truck. So it's not accurate. Like I said, it's not made for accuracy. It's not made for really being able to do a whole lot with it. It's just made because I need more rockets in this general direction. Or there's Russians in this general direction, let's harass them. It's not made for like actually being capable of being used anyway. They're not very good. I can tell you that firsthand. They suck when it comes to shooting off of. There are proper ways to do it. You're not going to be able to do that in the United States though. So that's just how it goes. If you want, if that's your crowd, man, then I would recommend talking to your local law enforcement and seeing what is legal and what is not, and also doing some very thorough research. Talking to an attorney would probably help too. But anyway, I'm going to jump back into the news here. So we all heard of Aiden Aslin, who is he's a British POW who he fought alongside Ukrainian forces in the Battle of Mariupol. He was at the Azovstal once his squad ran completely out of ammo and supplies. Part of them surrendered, and this is before the fall of the Azovstal. Quite some time. He was reportedly interrogated. We saw where he was pretty beat up. Some pictures that were released by the Russian forces, or specifically the DPR. And he, being a foreigner, and this is something that the DNR, the LNR, and the Russians have been very adamant about, is the fact that because he's a foreigner, they are going to consider him a mercenary, and they're going to, he basically wouldn't fall under the normal Geneva Convention rules, which is not entirely true. Mercenaries are actually protected by international law. And he's been fighting with the Azov Battalion for some time. It's not like he just joined this during the war. So basically, the Donetsk People's Republic was in charge of this. He was, and they concluded their investigation, and they said that the RIA News, which is government-owned media company in Russia, said that since he was considered a mercenary, he would be likely receiving the death sentence. It was quickly deleted, but somebody had the forethought to actually snap a screenshot of it. This was released on a tweet from RIA News website. And they will be sentencing him officially tomorrow. But take a look at this. So this individual had the forethought to snap a tweet here of RIA News talking about that he will be getting executed. Once again, war crime. But this is the city that when we talk about filtration camps, this is what we're talking about. This is the city where the filtration camp is in this general vicinity. When they're talking about, X amount of people were sent from Mariupol to a filtration camp near Bezimene. It's right down the road here. And as we actually come over to Mariupol, Mariupol's turned into a ghetto. And I don't mean like you're in the ghetto in the United States. I mean like you're in the Warsaw Ghetto during World War II. With no real access to running water, gas, or other essentials, and a lack of major sources of electricity, destroyed homes and belongings, the people of Mariupol, who have lost most of their family to the Russian invasion, suffer immensely. Much like the ghettos of World War II under the National Socialist German Workers' Party, also known as the Nazi Party for short, individuals must maintain their passports for filtration paperwork to identify themselves to be permitted to move throughout different districts of the city. Much like the Warsaw Ghetto, much like the Jewish people within the Warsaw Ghetto. And they are being slowly shipped off to a filtration camp, which has been most closely recognized as a concentration camp near Bezimene over the last several weeks since Russia has officially taken the city. We've heard that from the advisor and the mayor of Mariupol, Petro Ondashenko. No real potable water. You can't even really get fresh water. You have to go find, these special water stations. And even more than that, here you go. You have to have paperwork to do so for the filtration checkpoints. Ladies and gentlemen, every single day of this war that I see what Russia is doing, especially in occupied territories, the more and more and more and more and more, in my own personal mind, do I hearken back to historical events of the 20th century. You see the Sudetenland, back Nazi Germany, Adolf Hitler wanted the Sudetenland within Czechoslovakia for Lebensraum. Czechoslovakia wasn't even invited to the table, but the Allied powers stated that they would allow him to take the Sudetenland should he not invade the rest of Czechoslovakia. 2014, the Luhansk and Donetsk separatists take control of areas, and also Russian forces invade Crimea and parts of the Donetsk region without wearing any identifying marks other than their actual uniforms, effectively taking control of most of the Donetsk and Luhansk regions and all of Crimea in the process. Not but a decade later, they actually continued their invasion, invading north out of Belarus towards Kyiv, Kharkiv, and along the eastern front, and north out of Crimea to take the rest of these areas, including Mariupol, Kherson, pushing their way towards Mykolaiv, and were intended to conduct an amphibious assault and take the major port city of Odessa. Once again, 20th century history. Filtration camp systems. The isolation colony, penal colony number 52. Concentration camps. We read about it from the Chechen War. We talked about it here. Massive use of artillery, terror tactics, requiring paperwork in order to move throughout districts of cities, transitioning, consolidating power within those cities, the stealing of grain and other essential food items for native Russian peoples, mass executions, torture. Every single day of this war, I see similarities when it comes to historical events. Those who do not study history are doomed to repeat it. And I do not believe that Putin or most of his government studied what happened after the Great Patriotic War or during the Great Patriotic War. They just looked at the victory and used it as a horse to ride on. That's not what President Zelensky is doing, though, because he actually visited the front lines today. He actually went to the Zaporizhia Oblast, and he actually visited a frontline command center near the front lines within this region. You actually have some videos of that. Or not videos, but some photos of that. This man is known for keeping fatigues in his office. Like, he did this since he took office. He was on the front lines in the trenches with Ukrainian forces as the president of Ukraine before even this invasion. So he's already known to do stuff like this. He literally keeps military fatigues in his office. He goes down to the front lines all of the time. This is his real first time. He's actually getting around now. He's getting around. He's been essentially stuck in Kyiv, commanding the war from Kyiv for the last 3 months. Now it's safer for him to go out. We've seen him in Kharkiv. We've seen him go to Bucha. We've seen him go, to other parts of the country. Now he's on the front lines near Zaporizhia. And he's just in a command center here. It's just a field command. Well, they're explaining kind of what's going on here along the front lines. So, really important. When you're a commander needs to know what's happening on the ground, and the only way to really do that is to go to where it's at. Now, is it very risky for him to be on the front lines? Sure. I'm sure this is getting very much delayed. I'm sure he's not sitting in the exact same command center as we're speaking, but that's what we're talking about. That he is trying to command a war. He's trying to oversee military operations inside of his country and trying to make sure they're liberating his country, see where the difficulties are. Part of being a leader is you go to the place of friction. Zaporizhia, maybe not the most major fighting right now, there is still fighting along this front, and the front lines haven't budged throughout this entire offensive one way or the other. So, what's the problem? What's the friction? What do I need to do to break that friction so you can make an advance? And that is apparently what he is doing. And it also makes for good publicity, too. I can't blame him for that. As we jump over to Mykolaiv, though, once again, we see global famine being used as a weapon of war. And that's because Russia targeted a major grain exporter inside of the city of Mykolaiv. They officially hit it with, once again, what appears to be TBMs. Once again, this is more grain stocks. The facility is all but destroyed. And just take a look. You're not shipping grain out of that. It doesn't matter if you get deblockaded. You're not shipping grain out of that. The grain is gone. It's burned. Destroyed. Your storage facilities. Your employees. The things you need to load the grain onto ships. Gone. Destroyed. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is the end of the news inside of Ukraine. But there is some other news regarding the war, or at least regarding Russia. And that's because if you jump over here, we can take a look. And Lavrov had to cancel his trip to Serbia. Now, Lavrov is the Minister of Foreign Affairs for Russia. Very famous for within at least the Ukrainian facilities. He's really called a snake. But he had to cancel his scheduled trip over to Serbia after all of Serbia's nations or neighboring nations closed their airspace to Russian air traffic, meaning there's no airspace he could fly into in order to get to Serbia. So that effectively cuts off any Russian communication with the country of Serbia outside of course, Telelink communications. But Serbia is one of Russia's few allies, and especially in that region and within Europe, really they only have Serbia and Belarus. And the reason being is Serbia is kind of in a tight spot. Serbia had in the late 80s, early 90s, had a large conflict with Bosnia and Herzegovina and with Kosovo. And this area right here, the peace is extremely, extremely fragile. Like genocide between the Serbs and the Bosnians. Like that level of we do not like each other. So that is the situation within this region, and we've seen flights of Chinese aircraft going into Serbia. We've also seen flights of Russian aircraft going into Serbia, delivering weapons, actually, air defense systems and whatnot. Serbia is really militarizing. They've had some extremely vocal rhetoric about their neighbors, especially, and also regarding being a proponent for Russia and their invasion of Ukraine. So the tensions are already not great, and then Serbia is also heavily militarizing with the support of Russia and China, and their neighbors are not very comfortable. Their neighbors are very nervously sweating right now, is essentially the best way I could describe it, because, like I said, if there's going to be another major war to kick off, it's going to either be between, I would say it's going to be between Pakistan and India, because that's always been a problem, Taiwan and China, which then includes the United States and NATO and all of that fun stuff, or Serbia and Bosnia going back to war with each other. That's 100% a possibility. Or Kosovo and Serbia going at it again, or all three of them, because this area right here is not safe. They do not like each other whatsoever. So that is kind of where we're talking about major wars popping off, the possibility. That's really your hottest spots in the world right now. We're actually going to jump over here into Switzerland, almost on the border of France here in Geneva, where the WHO, the World Health Organization, actually gave us an update on the monkeypox. And monkeypox is up to 780 cases thus far and found in 27 countries. So basically, if you know someone that has monkeypox, or you suspect someone may have monkeypox and you live in one of these 27 countries, don't hug them. Don't have a lot of extremely intimate moments with them, because that's really how this is transferred, is being intimate with one another. And that actually brings us into the Middle East. And so we start to kind of divide up this conflict. This conflict is extremely, extremely complicated. Syria is so complicated that I don't fully understand it, and I was in Syria. That's how bad it is. So there are a lot of different factions, but really right now, because of the conflict, you can break them up into really three groups: pro-Turkish, pro-Syrian/Kurd, aka autonomy, versus invasion force, or Syrians versus Turks. And you can and the third group is going to be the Islamic State and other militant groups. Basically, when it comes to Turkey, everyone's kind of set aside their differences for a common enemy, and that is Turkey invading. We don't know which side Russia is on because Syria is a Russian ally, but they have been working together with the Turkish in regards to their security zones in here. So there is coordination between the Turks and the Russians. We don't know if they're going to join part with the Turks in assisting the Turkish military with continuing invading Syria. The Kurds and the Syrian National Army, who absolutely hate each other, are actually fighting on the same side, but in a limited capacity. And really the rest of them are like pro-Assad militia, which would be pro-Assad, which is the government forces, or it's militias that are against Assad that have put aside their differences and are fighting alongside the Kurds, like the SDF and the PKK. And then you just have the Islamic State, which is it's ISIS. I don't know what to tell you. We all know who ISIS is. So the first thing we have is that reports are starting to come in that Turkey may have begun invading Syria. Once again, I should say. They have a 30-kilometer security zone that they established in an initial invasion back in 2019 and 2020. They are planning on expanding this to a 60-kilometer security border, really because they want to push the Kurds as far away from Turkey as physically possible and kill as many of them in the process as they can. And with that, we don't know if this is the truth. We do not know if this is in fact what is happening. That is just what the reports are coming in as. Turkey is saying that while it hasn't occurred yet, that the invasion is imminent. So that is the reports we have right now. We've seen bombardments over the last few days, but we are seeing air assets, armored columns on the move. We're seeing artillery fire. We're even seeing operational patrols going on in the area, and not just security patrols, but actual combat patrols. So the Kurdish forces are reportedly going in for the intercept. They're currently moving to engage them as they're coming into this region. And it would appear that this one has been deleted, so I apologize for that. So gray is going to be Turkey focused, much like how red is Russia focused and yellow is Ukraine focused. This light gray color will be Turkey. And then as we jump down here, this is brown. So this is going to be the pro-Syrian whatever, anti-Turkey groups who are currently fighting. And so Damascus is currently only saying that they are going to be providing air defense systems to the Kurds. We've seen them conducting military exercises up in the northern region, and they said they would be fighting. But I'm sure that Russia had a little bit of influence into this, considering the Russians are really the only reason Assad has a country anymore. So the PKK is open to any cooperation with the Syrian army, but the main thing is that the official Damascus can help to provide is air defense systems to fight Turkish aircraft. So, listen, man, good luck. Here's some anti-air systems. Hope you win. We got other stuff to do. That's kind of what the Assad regime seems to be taking right now. And this is the PKK. And really the SDF, they all kind of wear the same uniform. But that's just them talking about this situation. So that is Mazloum Abdi, who is one of the spokesmen and leaders of the PKK and the Syrian Kurdish forces. So the stage is set. How in-depth the combat has gotten and how widespread it is, we don't know. We've seen minor movements. We're now hearing about much larger operational movements. We're hearing about, forces maneuvering into their positions. Has the invasion started? I would say it will be starting within the coming days, if not hours, is what we're looking at right now. So the stage is definitely set for a much larger conflict in Syria to begin once again. And that brings us over into Iraq. And we actually come up here to Dakuk, which is by the Kirkuk province. And the Islamic State actually burned fields belonging to the tribal militias. Once again, there's a famine going on in Iraq, and they're burning fields. The Islamic State aren't stupid. They know what they're doing. But Also, this is the Tigris River. It's going through a drought, so you don't have water. You're already not planning on harvesting as many crops as you normally would. You're going to have trouble feeding your family, and the Islamic State is now burning down what's left of your field. Let's take a look. Yet another raging fire. Congratulations. It's the Islamic State. They are a terrorist organization. I really hope somebody ends up killing those terrorists. As we move over here into the Diyala Governorate, the Islamic State also attacked a bunch of troops and the ambulances coming to assist them. So this terror attack, tribal militias were basically blown up by IEDs made by the Islamic State, and the terror group attacked government forces. Their ambulances came to evacuate and aid the wounded. They opened fire on the ambulances as well, and 17 people are currently reported injured in the engagement. So we do not know of any deaths at this point, but there is very limited information that we have regarding that situation. But as we come down here into the southern part of the country, there's a completely different situation that is currently developing. Hemorrhagic fever, which is, they have 136 cases according to the Ministry of Health, 23 of which are so far fatal. So 23 people have thus far died of this out of 136 cases. What this is it's a viral fever. It's a viral hemorrhagic fever, hemo regarding blood. It affects your it affects a lot of organs, but mostly your cardiovascular system. So how your blood is moved throughout your body, and it reduces the body's basically ability to function in and of itself and on its own. So once it's spread through contact through infected animal, people, insects, and it could include things like Ebola or even yellow fever. But basically, this causes things like multiple system organ failure and basically hemorrhaging shock. And that's eventually what's going to be killing you. So it is, from my understanding at least, treatable if caught at a correct time. But obviously, there are fatal cases. And healthcare systems in Iraq, well, maybe somewhat improved over time than they used to be, are definitely not necessarily say what it would be in Germany or Sweden or the United States or really any other country. The healthcare system in Iraq, while still relatively decent, is not necessarily first rate, I would say. Definitely very good doctors, but not the best healthcare system in the world. As we jump up here into Azerbaijan, there's actually a school bus accident over here in Shaki, which is up here. And you can see that there's this kind of a mountainous community. There's a pretty big ravine that runs in here. And as a result of the accident, this bus full of children actually rolled into the ravine. There were 16 children and 6 teachers on board. 11 people ended up in the hospital, but at least 10 of them thus far have been discharged. So one person still in the hospital, so it sounds like they received, relatively minor injuries, luckily. Not hearing anything regarding deaths, so that's good. But as you can see here, kind of went off the road, and now it's kind of overturned inside of this ravine here. So I really hope that last person gets released very soon, but I'm very happy to hear thus far that there are no deaths as a result. It's always kind of tragic, especially when you're talking about children. As we jump up here to Kazakhstan, Kazakhstan is actually holding a referendum because they're planning on making amendments to the constitution of the country. And so far, the turnout has exceeded the minimum threshold of 50%. So it means that the referendum is thus far a go. So with that, according to the referendum, the amendments for this is that powers of the president will actually be reduced. Some of the functions of the president will actually be transferred over to the parliament, so he basically won't have as many abilities or powers as he normally would. And also the death penalty will be abolished, as well as provisions for the special status of Nursultan Nazarbayev, which will be removed from the constitution. So that's pretty cool. There's actually a little bit of progress happening here inside of Kazakhstan, which we've seen a little bit of kind of really digressing as a society to an extent. over the last few months, and it seems like there's been a movement enough in the right direction to kind of come into a kind of a different system, at least, or have the opening or potential opening for that. As we jump down here into Bangladesh, 25 people have been killed and over 450 injured in a large warehouse fire over here in southeastern Bangladesh. It's a container warehouse, and when the fire broke out, like I said, 25 people killed, 450 injured. It's known that a few hours after the start of the fire, an explosion did occur. So whatever the cause of the explosion is, we're not quite sure, but it is a rather massive fire. And you can see it just out here in the distance. That is terrifying to look at. It looks like a volcanic eruption more than it does a fire. You can see some pretty large fire here. I mean, this is it's a lot of people to get injured. So I'm sure there will be a rather large investigation determining what the cause was. Jump down here into the Philippines, and we actually go over here into Sorsogon City, which is in Sorsogon, Philippines. And there is a active volcano that's starting to roar to life. The volcano's name is Bulusan, and it threw out a column of hot steam and ash over the province. There's been 77 volcanic earthquakes recorded over the past 24 hours. So they're saying so far, while the activity is gradually increasing, it's a little bit too early to talk about an actual full-scale eruption, though I'm sure precautions and I'm sure analysts are being currently all working day and night to figure out, because a lot of people have said the same thing about other volcanoes and were wrong, and that's usually not the situation, such as Mount St. Helens, where people were completely unprepared for the eruption. So, very interesting. We can go ahead and take a look here.
Kadako, shucks. Kakusuga. Katakot.
So you wouldn't know it. You'd think it was probably erupting, but I guess it's not, which is a good. I mean, I really hope that the people of this city can get out of the way and not have to deal with this. But, I mean, that's good for right now, but I hope that they can come to a conclusion as to what they need to do in order, evacuation-wise, or if everything's going to be relatively safe, that kind of thing. There are active volcanoes throughout the world that do this occasionally. Either Iceland or Greenland, I cannot remember off the top of my head, or is actually relatively known for it. I think it's Greenland, actually, where they're known for, they have some active volcanoes there that just kind of spew ash and everything, but they're not really erupting, or they're kind of like a low continuous eruption. Same thing with like Hawaii. So it kind of cool, but I just hope that everyone's going to be okay over there. So we jump over here into Africa, and we have a couple of different things going on. So first of all, 50 dead in the Ondo, in the terror attack in Ondo. So this is in Nigeria. We do not know if this was the Islamic State. What we do know is that the attack was mostly against Christians, so it does definitely fit the profile. They detonated an IED in one of the local churches and then opened fire on the people. So far, the total death toll is 50. So we do not have any further information regarding this. Information coming out of Africa is a little bit difficult to come by as is, just because there's not a whole lot of people that are, unless you're actually working actively regarding like intelligence in this area. There's not really a lot of people that seem to pay attention to much to what's going on other than the Islamic State. So that's just kind of the situation going on in Nigeria. We know that that the Islamic State is heavily active in this region, and it definitely fits their profile based off of previous attacks. But as we jump up here into Mali, we see that there's heavy fighting near, I'm going to try and pronounce this, Andaram Bukane, which is actually right here on the border. It's right here on the border with Niger, and what we're seeing here is there's really serious fighting. It's between three groups: the Islamic State, the Azawad militias, and then you also have government forces in this area. So Yesterday, militias boasted that they managed to take control of the settlement. The Islamic State retreated, and then a day later, so today, they regrouped. The Islamic State conducted a counteroffensive and drove the Azawads out of there. So there are pretty heavy losses on both sides, but extremely heavy fighting. And then you also have the government forces, which are actually preparing to conduct a counteroffensive against the Azawads anyway, because the Azawads are planning on splitting the country of Mali in two. They're planning on declaring independence, much like the situation when it came to North and South Sudan. So that is currently where we are sitting regarding the country of Mali. And as we jump over into the United States real quick, there was another shooting in the United States. This is in Philadelphia, and it was a street shooting. 3 people have been killed, 11 injured after several armed men opened fire on the crowd. 2 pistols and a large number of shell casings have been found at the scene of the crime. It's noted that a policeman managed to shoot one of the attackers, and a search is underway for the perpetrators. The motive for the shooting is not clear. So that is currently the situation. So once again, yet another mass shooting inside of the United States over the course of about a month. So I think this is the 3rd or 4th that we've had. So in a little bit lighter news, though, we're actually going to jump up here into Norway. And man, is this an old shoe. 3,000 years old, in fact. It's the 3,000-year-old booty from the Bronze Age. It's just one of thousands of ancient artifacts recovered when the country's melting mountain ice patches over the past 2 decades. So they're finding thousands of items that have been trapped in the ice. And so, unlike other trapped objects, the acidic soil or beneath the gargantuan glaciers, the artifacts recovered from the Norwegian ice patches are often found to be in impeccable condition, showing minimal decomposition and deformation. And even after thousands of years of their frozen slumber, this is because the ice patches are relatively stable, unmoving, and free of corrosive compounds. So you're finding weapons that are intact, clothing, textiles, plants, animals, all of that. So it's really cool. It's a small leather shoe, about 4 to 5 inches in today's size. So it belonged to either a woman or a youth. And so they found also several arrows, a wooden spade around this area, so it suggested that this may be a hunting site. And it dates approximately to 1100 BC, which makes it not only the oldest shoe in Norway, but also possibly the oldest article of clothing discovered in all of Scandinavia. So, why is a shoe historically significant? Well, literally anything you can find is amazing. The fact that this thing is 1100 years old, this is really organic materials. Think about it. It's leather, it's wood, it's stone. This is organic materials that break down over time. I mean, decomposition of animals. I mean, their hides, animal hides when they're still attached to the animal do decompose, and that happens in a matter of weeks, let alone 1100 years. The fact that stuff being frozen in ice is amazing. They find all sorts of cool stuff. They find mammoths in ice. They find all sorts of stuff in ice. People. So it's really cool, and to be able to understand how people lived thousands of years ago to really get up to where we are now. I mean, Scandinavia especially, very, very storied history. A lot of early people. You have the Neanderthals who were in this region. You have Vikings. You have all sorts. Just people have been living in Scandinavia for thousands of years. And so it's just a very storied history. It's a very cool bit of history there. But I think even more slightly fascinating is out here in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, where an 83-year-old man solo sailed the Pacific Ocean. He's 83 years old. He's a Japanese man his name is Henishi Hori, and he sailed 8,500 kilometers in 2 months. He used for communication a satellite phone and for electricity solar panels installed on board his sailboat. So he solo sailed non-stop across the Pacific. This isn't the first time, though, because he became so not only is he now the oldest person to do this, he was also the first person to do it in 1962 when he did it at just the age of 23. Absolutely amazing. This man has solo sailed twice the Pacific Ocean. He was the first one to do it, and now he's the oldest one to do it. So very cool. Very cool indeed. I think it's just fascinating that people will do something like that. I mean, people think, well, people have circumnavigated the world now. That happens, in the 1600s, 14 through 1600s, the age of discovery. I mean, we've discovered every land mass on Earth. What's left? Well, there's always something left. There's always something to strive for. There is always going to be something to strive for. This man's 83 years old and he's setting records. So there is always something to strive for, and it doesn't stop until you choose to. So whether that's and whether that's, the day, you're on your deathbed, or that's the day, whatever. But just, you will find an opportunity at some point. Just keep going on that, because this guy, like I said, he's 83 years old. He's not slowing down. Sailing is not easy. I've heard it is not easy. I've never sailed myself, but I have family who do like sailboat races because, well, they're a little bit better off than I am. But they actually do sailboat races, and they, it's not easy. They have a crew and everything else, and it's difficult to say the least. So the fact that this guy did this solo across the ocean, across the Pacific Ocean, the largest ocean in the world, is amazing. And with that, that's actually all of the news for the day. A lot of stuff getting set up. The pieces are starting to kind of fall in line. The Islamic State, how they're kind of operating. They're kind of putting themselves in a position to go on a large scale offensive. The Azawads setting up for splitting Mali in half and declaring independence, and the military junta to oppose. The war between Turkey, Syria, and the invasion, that is, either in its very early phases, which means it will be coming within the next hours, if not days. And then, of course, the resistance there. The battle in the Donbass is really starting to hit a point where we're going to, Severodonetsk, they went from 20% recaptured yesterday. Now we're sitting at a 50-50, reportedly. That's a major counteroffensive. There's a major counteroffensive in Kherson that has seen a lot of gains. You're seeing the president going to the front lines. A lot of things are starting to kind of fall together. And so we're going to keep updated on this. We're going to keep doing this. But tomorrow is Monday. We do take Mondays off here, so we will not be streaming tomorrow. Just so for your guys' essay. So if there is a major development, I may post announcements, especially regarding Turkey or in Ukraine or other major developments going on worldwide that have really major impacts. But other than that, we won't be streaming at all tomorrow. We're taking the day off. So I appreciate you guys joining us tonight. Please, obviously, there's not a whole lot of good stuff going on in the world. There's a lot of bad stuff, except for, a 1,300-year-old shoe and an 83-year-old Japanese guy sailing the largest ocean in the world by himself. So there's a lot of terrible stuff going on, and luckily we can help with that, because this is an awesome community. You guys have made it an awesome community and continue to do so. And we get to be the news that goes back. So please check out in the description below and help us help other people throughout the world. We want to help not just people in Ukraine, but people globally, because we all are in this together, like it or not. So please check out the description below and check out the different organizations we've gone through and vetted, and we continue to vet. If you have more, please send them to us. We'll get them through the vetting process. We're currently working on several that are being apparently difficult, but we are currently wanting to make sure that you're safe from scams and stuff like that. So please check that out. If you can't give a lot, give a little. If you can't give anything at all, give us a like and subscribe. It helps us reach more people, and more people means more people that, one, can come and enjoy the way we do news here, but also can pitch in and help people globally with all of these kind of situations. I mean, we could save starving children in Africa, quite literally. So that's an amazing thing. I don't think there's anything better you could do as a human being. So I appreciate the support you've already given us to us as a group and to the organizations that we've put down in the description that we're trying to get boosted money for. I can't appreciate enough the staff to actually put this together. I really just lend the voice that they're the ones that are doing the research and finding this stuff for the stream. And I really can't appreciate you as the community. I mean, you guys are amazing. I love talking to you guys when I get a chance. I love getting the questions from you guys and being able to answer, and at least to the best of my ability, with whatever background I have, especially when it comes to the Middle East. So, but I really can't appreciate you guys enough. I mean, we've been doing this for almost 3 months now, so it's been amazing thus far, and I can't wait to continue. So thank you guys for joining us. Thank you guys for the support. I hope that you, your friends, and your family remain safe. If not, I hope that you find that safety and security in the very near future. Other than that, I will talk to you guys later. My name is Paul from the New News. Thank you for joining us. Have a great night. Bye.